Thanks to Taylor for the introduction, and thank you, Jeremy, for inviting me. I guess I can skip the bio today. Yeah, I've bounced all around the country. You can see it there. I grew up in Delaware. I was actually born in California, grew up in Delaware, went to school in New Jersey, California, Yale, Durham, North Carolina, etc. Here are my wife and our 4 kids, ages 10, 8, 6, and 4. And yes, I homeschool them. It's been a really great opportunity. I'm here today to talk to you about critical theory, which has absolutely nothing to do with my training in theoretical chemistry. And what is critical theory? What does that even mean? What are we talking about? Well, before we answer that question in detail, I want to show you 3 slides that capture something that's happening in our culture today. So 3 slides. First one. This is an exchange on Twitter between Cher and Rosie O'Donnell. I've been told that you don't know who Cher or Rosie O'Donnell are because you are all in high school. That's what I've been told. So Cher is an old person singer from the 70s. She was before my time too. But she has like 1 million Twitter followers. Rosie O'Donnell was the talk show host on The View, comedian. But they had an exchange on Twitter. Cher begins the exchange by saying, Biden, Beto 2020. So she's a fan of Joe Biden and Beto O'Rourke for the presidential ticket on 2020. Rosie responds, say no to Joe. And one of Cher's fans says, well, why? Why not? What's wrong with Joe Biden? And O'Donnell responds succinctly, no more old white men. Okay, next. In 2016, there's a horrific mass shooting at the Pulse nightclub in Orlando, Florida. It's a gay nightclub. About 100 people were murdered horrifically by a shooter who pledged allegiance to the Islamic State at the time. Okay, he was a son of Afghani refugees. In response to that shooting, a major national activist organization wrote a letter, and in that letter they said, the enemy is now and has always been the 4 threats of white supremacy, patriarchy, capitalism, and militarism. These forces and not Islam create terrorism. These forces and not queerness create homophobia. Now that's kind of odd because the shooter was the son of Afghani immigrants. He was not white, and he was pledged allegiance to the Islamic State. So what does capitalism have to do with that, or white supremacy? That's unclear. Finally, here's a peer-reviewed paper entitled Glaciers, Gender, and Science. In that paper, the authors argue that we need to develop a feminist glaciology, a feminist study of glaciers, big blocks of ice, right, on the North and South poles, right? We need a feminist theory of glaciers because that will lead to more just and equitable science and human ice interactions. Now, here's a question. It's peer-reviewed, guys. Here's the question. What do these 3 incidents have in common? You could write them, this is just weird, it's crazy, this kind of sounds politically correct somehow, but there's no underlying ideology behind these 3 incidents, right? That's understandable, but that's wrong. I'm going to show you today that there is a deep underlying worldview or ideology or even religion behind these 3 events, okay? And it's called critical theory. You might ask, well, why should we care? As Christians, why should we care about critical theory? This sounds just bizarre and weird. Who believes this stuff? Well, a few years ago, I began to notice a theological drift among certain evangelicals, both people I knew personally and public figures. It would often begin with a concern for social justice. They'd care about issues like racism and sexism. That's great. We should all be adamantly opposed to racism and sexism. But then they would move from those concerns to other beliefs that were more and more heterodox and bizarre and harder to reconcile with Christianity. In some cases, they became... Heterodox just means not orthodox, the opposite of what's true in biblical doctrine. So they began to espouse beliefs that were not true. They even became atheists in some cases. And I couldn't figure it out. How do you go from saying racism is a sin, which I agree with, everyone agrees with, I hope, to saying Jesus is not the Son of God? How do you get from point A to point B? I couldn't understand why. Until I read this book called Race, class, and gender. It's a 500-page anthology of writings on a diverse set of topics, from capitalism to queer theory to critical race theory. When I finished that book, I immediately posted on Facebook, "This is the most important book I've read in years." It made me realize people were not just adopting a few new beliefs about politics, they were adopting a new worldview, a new religion that was gradually eroding their Christian faith. That's why I'm concerned, because there is in our culture, in the water we drink, in the air we breathe, a new religion that we are often absorbing without knowing it that is going to erode our Christian beliefs. Okay, I want to then turn to this question, what is critical theory? In this section, I'm going to just define critical theory. I'll show its core tenets, its core beliefs. I'm not going to critique it. I am just going to tell you what it says. I'm even going to point out some of the strengths of critical theory. It's attractive for a reason. It captures important truths, and if we ignore them, we'll actually weaken our case against it. We'll lose credibility. We have to listen first. And then I'll move on to what are the conflicts between critical theory and Christianity. I'll talk about logical implications of these beliefs, where they're going to lead you, if not today, in 5 years, 10 years, and then finally close with some advice for dialogue. Let's begin with this question. What is critical theory? Critical theory is this ideology that informs a huge number of academic disciplines, things like gender studies, cultural studies, critical race theory, feminism, literary criticism. If you go to college and take a course that ends in studies, it is almost certainly based on the framework of critical theory. I like to characterize critical theory according to 3 or 4 or 6, some small set of basic tenets, some basic core beliefs that are affirmed by critical theorists, okay? I'll go through each of them in turn. And I think as I illuminate these, or as I enumerate these beliefs, you'll immediately recognize them from our culture. Number 1, critical theory fundamentally is about power. It divides the world, all of reality, into 2 groups, oppressed groups and oppressor groups, along axes of race, class, gender, ethnicity, physical ability, sexual orientation, age, and a number of other factors. And so, for example, in this quote, Sensoy and D'Angelo say this: "In any relationship between groups that define one another, like men and women, able-bodied, disabled, young, old, the dominant group is the group that is valued more highly. Dominant groups set the norms by which the minoritized group is judged." So the dominant group imposes their values on culture. They set the terms, they set the norms, the expectations, what is normal and regular, and they define what is abnormal and irregular and unusual. That's the dominant group. And everybody else accepts those ideas. And that is the concept of, it's called hegemonic power. Hegemonic power means the ability of your group to impose your group's values on all of society. That's called hegemonic power. And that's the core of oppression. When a group is underneath hegemonic power, they are being oppressed. And that leads to another key point. There's a moral asymmetry between different groups. So the oppressor group, but crudely, the oppressor group are the bad guys. The oppressed group are the good guys. And it's not about your individual conduct that matters. Whether you personally are kind and loving and gentle, that doesn't matter because you are stained by your group's identity. Here's Peggy McIntosh. She popularized the phrase white privilege in a 1988 paper. She writes this: "My schooling gave me no training in seeing myself as an oppressor." This is extraordinary. She's saying, I was an oppressor, I didn't know it. I didn't know I was an oppressor, but I was. She says, "I was taught to see myself as an individual whose moral state depended on her individual moral will." She now rejects that view. No, if you're part of an oppressor group, you are an oppressor. If you're part of an oppressor group, you are morally stained by your group's oppression. Okay, now why is this relevant? Well, think about how old white men are the canonical oppressor group in our culture today, right? Now think about that. Does that make sense? Old white men are only 15% of the US population. There are actually fewer old white men than there are non-white men, non-white women or white women. And yet they're the canonical oppressor group. Why? They're in the numerical minority, but they have hegemonic power. That's why they're considered to be oppressors. Now, how do you see this asymmetry in practice? Well, I challenge you, actually I don't challenge you, to go on Twitter and search for the phrase old white men. You'll see college professors saying things like, I fantasize about the miserable deaths of old white men. Could you imagine a college professor going publicly and saying, I fantasize about the miserable deaths of poor Hispanic women? Oh yes, that would be great. That would be just horrifically, it's horrific, should be pilloried in the media. But here, why is it more acceptable to criticize a whole demographic group because of their gender or their age or their race? Because they are an oppressor group. That's why it's okay to punch up, as the phrase goes. Because you're coming from the position of an oppressed group standing up against your oppressor. So that's okay. So this is moral asymmetry. Okay, number two, that's number one. Number two, our fundamental moral duty is freeing groups from oppression. I'll skip the quote from Suzanne Farr, but critical theorists might think there are other duties we have beyond resisting oppression, but our primary duty as human beings is to resist oppression and to liberate the oppressed. And that duty can supersede all other moral duties. They might talk maybe occasionally about other virtues, things like honesty, kindness, compassion, generosity, but generally when critical theorists talk about what's required of us as human beings, they'll talk about liberating oppressed groups. And that actually is the root of the critical theorist's definition of social justice. When a critical theorist talks about social justice, they mean liberating oppressed groups. Now, I understand social justice is a very nebulous, slippery phrase, but when it's used by critical theorists, it means liberating oppressed groups. Here's a quote from Mary McClintock. Social justice is the elimination of all forms of social oppression. Now, what are the forms of social oppression? She lists them. Social injustice can take many forms. It can be injustice based on a person's gender, race, ethnicity, religion, sexual orientation, physical or mental ability, or economic class. These are the axes of oppression defined by critical theory. So when a critical theorist talks about social justice, they mean liberating groups that are subordinated by hegemonic power, that are imbibing the norms of the dominant group. We have to free them from that oppression. Now, what are some examples of this? Well, here's an extreme case, but it's very applicable. This is Antifa. Antifa is an activist group all over the country. They may be originated in Portland, Oregon, but I think they're worldwide now. But they justify violence. On what grounds? Because they are committed to resisting oppression. Here's an example. In 2017, an Antifa member hit a Trump supporter on the head with a bike lock. Not because the Trump supporter was doing anything violent, he was just talking, but he was a Trump supporter and therefore he was an oppressor. The irony is the man who committed the assault taught ethics at a local university. Now, how could he justify hitting a random person with a bike lock? Because he's trying to liberate groups from oppression. That takes precedence, or that command, thou shalt liberate the oppressed, takes precedence over all other moral commands, even those as simple as thou shalt not hit people with bike locks, right? So we see here the emphasis in the morality of critical theory is almost completely given over to liberating groups from oppression. Finally, lived experience gives oppressed groups unique access to truth. So critical theories would say that oppressor groups, they justify their oppression by appealing to quote unquote objectivity, reason, evidence, logic. That's just an excuse to impose their values to gain power for their own group. All these appeals are fake. They're pretenses for the purpose of gaining and preserving their own power and privilege. Okay? So critical theorists are very skeptical of objectivity, or they'll just deny it completely. For example, this is a great quote from Anderson and Collins. The idea that objectivity is best reached only through rational thought is a Western and masculine way of thinking, one that we will challenge throughout this book. So critical theorists deny that groups can appeal to objective reason and objective evidence that's just an excuse to maintain your power. Well, what takes the place of reason and evidence and argument? The answer is lived experience. So you give your lived experience, and here's the thing. If you're part of an oppressor group, if you're privileged, that privilege blinds you. You're part of the system. And so you have an inherent desire to maintain your power, so you're blind to reality, right? And similarly, though, if you're part of an oppressed group, if you're subordinate, if you're a woman, say, you are socialized into that system. It's like the matrix, right? It's all around you. You can't see it. So you're internalized into this oppressive system, so you experience internalized oppression. So both men, the dominant group, and the subordinate group, women, have imbibed this false narrative. However, because women are subordinate, because they're oppressed, it's possible for them to achieve what's called a liberatory consciousness, right? They can step back and say, wait a minute, this is all a lie. The patriarchy has been lying to me. I can now remove my blindfolds and see the truth. So they can achieve a liberatory consciousness, and then, because their lived experience gives them insight into reality that isn't experienced by oppressor groups, their statements have to be taken with complete deference. You have to just defer to their beliefs. Whatever you say is true, because who am I as a man to tell you what your lived experience is wrong? Right? So oppressed groups have unique authority to dictate reality to oppressor groups. And actually, and this is also the kind of intersectionality comes in here. The more oppressed groups you're part of, the greater insight you have into the truth, and the greater awareness you have, the greater authority you have to talk about oppression. So if you're a woman, you have unique insight into truth that a man doesn't have. If you're a woman of color, you have an even greater authority and insight. If you're a lesbian woman of color, you have an even greater authority in terms of talking about oppression. So the more intersectional your experience is, the more authority and knowledge you have. Okay, and where do you see this? If you're involved in pro-life apologetics as a man, you've almost certainly heard the slogan, no uterus, no opinion. Now, where does that slogan come from? Well, one of the reasons is because as a man, you don't have the ability or the authority to dictate to a woman what reality is like, because she has her lived experience. She has access to truth that you don't have as a man because she's a woman, okay? All right, so I think it's pretty clear to me that if you are part of our culture, you'll realize, yeah, I've heard these claims a lot. This is a big part of our media, entertainment, sports, news, politics. It's everywhere, okay? Before I critique critical theory, I want to point out its strength. It's very important, okay? What does critical theory get right? Why is it so attractive to so many people? Well, first, critical theory recognizes that oppression is a sin. It is wicked. The Bible talks a lot about oppression. The paradigmatic act of salvation in the Old Testament was God freeing what? The slaves who were oppressed in Egypt. He liberated them. That is the paradigm of salvation in the Old Testament, right? And now we have Jesus' liberation of us in the New Testament. So the idea that oppression is a sin is correct. Keep in mind, though, the way the Bible and the dictionary define oppression is very different than the way that critical theorists define oppression. The oppression to Christians does not mean what it means to critical theorists. That's a huge warning. But the core idea that liberation is a good thing is true. 2, critical theory focuses on structures and groups and systems, not on individuals. That's not always a bad thing. So it is true that because human beings are sinners, we create societal systems and laws that are also sinful. A good example, the Holocaust, right? It would be ridiculous to understand the Holocaust by looking at, well, this one German dude killed that one Jewish dude, and that one German guy, he killed that Jewish family. That's not how you look at the Holocaust. You have to understand that the individual wickedness of the human heart was expressed in a system of laws that enshrined anti-Semitism and murder in the German legal system, right? It's silly to focus on just individual actions when we have entire structures perpetuating human wickedness. So that idea is not false. It's deeply biblical. Some laws are unjust, and Christians should oppose them. And third, hegemonic power is a real thing. Good example, the standards that we set of beauty and sexuality, right? As a Christian parent, I have to talk to my kids all the time about how the things they see on TV, in advertisements, in movies, they are not true. They are false. These images of women that are airbrushed, these ideas of casual sex, that is false. That is not reality. That is not the values that God promotes. So what is that? That is the hegemonic power of Hollywood and Madison Avenue. That is their norms, their expectations, their values being imposed on culture. And as Christian parents, we have to resist that and say, no, that's a lie. Beauty is more about what's inside of you than what is outside of you. I tell my daughters all the time. So, so the point is, that is not a conspiracy theory, that is real. Hegemonic power does actually exist. Okay, critique. What is wrong with critical theory? As a Christian, what do I have to realize is incompatible with my basic Christian beliefs? Well, the conflicts are manifold. Number one, critical theory is a worldview. It's a way of looking at all of reality. It answers basic questions like, who are we? What is our fundamental problem as human beings? What's the solution? What should we do with our lives? Critical theory and Christianity answer all these questions, these basic questions about life, in totally different ways. So Christianity has been described as a narrative that starts with creation and ends in restoration. We're created by a loving, holy, just God, but we fell, we sinned, we rebelled against God. So God sent Jesus to redeem us, to rescue us, and one day there will be justice when God comes to restore all things. That's the arc of the Christian message. Critical theory offers a totally different story. There is no creation element in critical theory. That's huge. In other words, we don't define ourselves primarily in terms of who we are as God's creatures vertically. We define ourselves entirely in terms of how we interact and relate to other groups. Are we being oppressed by them? There's no creation element. Your identity is what group you're part of, what your race, your class, your gender is. That's where you get your identity from. There's no fall, but there's oppression. Oppression takes the place of fall, and privilege is the place of original sin, right? We're stained, we're tainted by our privilege, and our problem is oppression. The solution is not redemption, but activism. If you're part of an oppressor group, you have to divest yourselves of privilege. If you're an oppressed person, you need to stand up to the man and throw off his chains, and the goal is liberation or equality or social justice or equity. That's the goal that we're striving for as human beings. So if you compare these two stories, they are totally different. You cannot combine them. They're different worldviews. Worldviews do not play well together. You'll constantly be forced to choose between critical theory and Christianity in terms of your ethics, your priorities, your empathy, what you talk about, where you invest your time, your money. You cannot espouse both worldviews. It's like trying to be a Christian and also an atheist. Those worldviews do not fit together, okay? Is it really that big of a problem? Yes, it is. Here's a tweet from Union Theological Seminary. They're responding to a statement on social justice on the gospel, which they reject, but in their rejection, here's what they say. They say, while divinely inspired, we deny the Bible is inerrant or infallible because it was written by men over centuries and thus reflects both God's truth and human sin and prejudice. Now, question. You have your Bible. How do you know what in the Bible is good and true in God's Word and what is just sinful? They tell you right here. We affirm that biblical criticism, scholarship, and critical theory help us discern which messages are God's. Right there, they're like, what's our authority? Not the Bible, it's got sin in it. Our authority is we get critical theory and biblical scholarship to tell us what in the Bible we keep and what we discard as regressive. So critical theory has critical theory has replaced their worldview now as the ultimate authority that tells you what is good and what is bad. Okay. Next, epistemology. Normally, when someone makes a claim, that claim has to be grounded in evidence. You say, oh, the sky is blue. We say, why do you believe the sky is blue? What is your evidence? What's your argument? Give me some logic. So you refer the claim back to evidence. If you've ever read C.S. Lewis, most of you probably have, he coined a term called bulverism. Bulverism is a fallacy in argumentation where you ignore reason and logic and evidence. Instead, you focus on the person making the claim. You say, what is your agenda? What's your motive? What's your goal in all this? Why would you? Oh, of course, you would say the sky is blue. You're one of those blue skiers. You're probably getting kickbacks from the blue sky lobby in Congress, right? How much are they paying you, blue sky man, right? So that's bulverism. You ignore the argument and you focus instead on their motivation. You assume the claim is false and say, oh, I know why you're claiming that. It's because you're one of those blue skiers. So you focus on their hidden agenda, their motivation. Their psychology, oh, you would say that, you're a man, you're white, you're heterosexual, you're a Republican, you're a Democrat, whatever. That's how you avoid the claim itself, okay? Critical theory does exactly that all the time. When you make a claim, no one says, well, what's your evidence? What's your argument? Because remember, arguments are just the tools that oppressor groups use to subjugate oppressed groups, right? They're just pretend, they're illusions. They're not real. They're really just trying to maintain supremacy. But what if the person making the claim is part of an oppressed group? What if a woman says, well, I don't like abortion either? What's your answer? Do you say, I should consider her claim? No, you say, you have, my dear, internalized oppression. Right? So if an oppressor makes a claim, oh yeah, that's maintaining supremacy, right? That's your privilege talking. If an oppressed person makes the claim, oh, well, I can ignore you, you have internalized oppression. Never do you have to actually address the claim, and even if the claim is based on Scripture. What does the Bible say about this topic? Oh, well, you would say that, you're a man. Oh, you would say that, you've internalized oppression. At no point do we have to actually engage with the claims of the Bible. That's very dangerous, and it's happening all the time. Okay. Third, we talked about how critical theory's view of identity is very different than the Christian view. So critical theory necessarily divides the world into oppressor groups and oppressed groups along the lines of race, class, gender, and a host of other markers. If there were some fundamental identity marker that was common to all human beings, that would radically destroy the basic premise on which critical theory rests, right? If there were something that all men and all women had in common, you couldn't pit them against each other anymore, right? Because they all have the same basic identity. Well, Christianity offers not just one, but three basic markers that is common to all human beings. Number one, we are all united in creation. We're all made in God's image. Male and female, black and white, Hispanic, Asian, anything, you name it. We're all made in God's image. That breaks down the idea that we can be segregated into these fighting, warring factions and groups, right? Two, we're all fallen in sin. They're not the evil, bad guy oppressors and the very noble, good oppressed people. There are rebels against God who need what? Redemption. The third marker. We're all made in God's image. We're all fallen in sin. We all need salvation, right? That claim, these claims that are basic to the Christian worldview, are radically subversive. They undermine racism, they undermine sexism, they undermine classism, and they undermine critical theory. And for exactly the same reason, because Christianity says you're all creatures of God, and therefore cannot be divided like that. So critical theory is antithetical to Christianity in this way. And finally, so fourth, hegemonic power. Critical theory thinks hegemonic power is a bad thing. It's oppressive. Bad news. The Bible is one gigantic hegemonic discourse from start to finish. The Bible tells one big, long story about how God has all the power, all the authority, He has all the goodness, He owes nothing to us, He's completely sovereign. It justifies God's rule in our lives. There is one story of religion There's one sort of morality. There's one sort of sexuality and gender. But critical theory views all those statements as supremely oppressive. In fact, from the perspective of critical theory, God is the great oppressor, right? He's giving us this narrative, and we say, I reject your narrative, it oppresses me. That's not how Christianity works, guys. God is good all the time God is good, right? You cannot be a Christian and think that God's power is oppressive and you need to be freed from it. That's not going to work. And finally, this moral asymmetry. So critical theory says you have the good guys who are oppressed and the bad guys who are oppressors, and because of that there's an asymmetry between people. Here's an example. Sarah Jiang was hired recently by the New York Times as their tech columnist. When she was hired, a bunch of old tweets were unearthed where she says these horrific things about white people. This is one example. I'm not going to read all these tweets. They're pretty vile. She says, are white people genetically predisposed to burn faster in the sun, thus logically being only fit to live underground like groveling goblins? Right? And there's a whole string of these tweets she made about mocking white men, blasting white people, saying all these terrible things, right? And she was hired, but people defended her tweets. On what grounds? Here's Zach Beauchamp in Vox. That's what her tweets were different than actual racism, he says. Why? Because of the underlying power structure in American society. What is that? Critical theory. He's saying, well, she's part of an oppressed group, so she can't by definition be racist. Yeah, sure, calling people goblins is technically racist, but not, underlying power structure. So in these discussions, now, what does the Bible say about that? The Bible says all human beings are held to one standard, God's moral law. It does not matter if you're oppressed. You are to speak the truth in love, right? You're to consider other people better than yourselves, right? There is not one law for one kind of people and a different law for other kinds of people. There is one moral law. So this moral asymmetry is absolutely incompatible with Christian view of morality. So I've just shown briefly, 5 ways in which critical theory and Christianity are not compatible. You cannot hold both simultaneously. And you will find, to the extent that you embrace critical theory, you will have to jettison Christian beliefs, period. That's not all. Let's go on to logical implications next. What I find more often than not is Christians who embrace critical theory, they start out by embracing sort of slogans or teams or tribes. They're like, these slogans sound good, but they don't think through the logical implications of those slogans. So I'm going to give you 3 that are rooted in critical theory, and we're going to work through those slogans and see where they actually lead us. So number 1, let's hear, what about the slogan, we should never challenge lived experience? You probably heard it. Don't challenge you're invalidating their existence if you deny their lived experience. That's their experience. How dare you, right? Well, let's think about that. What if I said, as a woman, I know their society is deeply sexist. As a black man, I know their society is deeply racist. As a lesbian, I know their sexual orientation is fixed from birth. As a Sufi Muslim, I know that Islam is true. As a polyamorous man, I know that sex outside of marriage is okay. As a Hindu, I know that all paths lead to God. Now, you might be tempted to accept some of those claims and reject others. But if you subscribe to the belief that you should never challenge lived experience, which of those claims do you have to accept? All of them. If you are logically consistent, you must accept all of those. So go back. So Christians cannot accept the idea that we should never challenge lived experience. Now, of course, we should be gentle and kind. I am tremendously privileged for many reasons. My experiences are not reflective of everyone's experiences. If someone has a different experience, I should listen to them. I should be humble. I should be open-minded. Maybe I am blinded by my experiences. That's fine. But at the end of the day, we have to ask, what does the Bible say, and what does objective reality say? Your truth is not true. There is one truth. There's not your truth and my truth. There is the truth, and we all have to submit to the truth as revealed in Scripture and in reality, in nature. Okay. Number 2, we need to liberate our theology from privileged groups. So here are some things you might have heard. We need to decenter white theology and platform the theology of people of color. We need to decenter Western theology and platform non-Western theology. We need to decenter male theology and platform feminist theology. We need to decenter the Eurocentric creeds of the Reformation and platform liberation theology. We need to decenter the all-male books of the Bible and platform the extra-biblical books written by women. Again, you're like, well, I don't believe that last one. Why not? Are you committed to liberating our theology from privileged groups? Are men privileged? Well, of course they are, according to critical theory. Is the Bible written by all men? Oh, gosh. It was, wasn't it? Do I need new books now? Oh, I didn't think of that. You guys are, most of you probably are Protestants, right? Where did the Protestant Reformation start? Europe. It was white men in Europe. Gosh, we need new theology now, right? No, guys, wait a minute. What's wrong with this whole line of reasoning? Do I need female mathematics? Do I need female mathematics? Do I need female glaciology? Remember back at the paper meeting? You laughed at it, right? Female glaciology. Yeah, that's ridiculous. You don't need male mathematics or female. There's no such thing as male mathematics and female mathematics. Well, why not? Because it's true. It's just true or false. It's not male or female. Oh, what about theology? Oh, it's different. Oh, really? So theology is different than math or science? Is it not true or false? What? Whoa! Right? We've gotten our categories totally mixed up. Theology is not black or white or Asian or Hispanic or male or female. It is either true or false. So by all means, if you say, well, I think we should listen to voices outside of the Western tradition, by all means. I'm totally open to someone saying, I think your tradition has gotten the Bible wrong. Amen, hallelujah. Sola Scriptura. Let's go back to the Bible and say, what does the Bible teach? But let us not say, oh, a woman of color teaches this theology, therefore what? It's true? No, the only question Christians have to ask is, what saith the Scriptures, right? So again, there's a motivation that makes these things sound good. We should be wary because our traditions have unfairly, unduly privileged certain voices. That's correct. It does not follow that the Bible should be interpreted only through certain lenses. That's not correct, right? Let's ask what the Bible teaches, not whose theology is this. Okay, number 3, we should dismantle all structures that perpetuate privilege. Again, you hear that a lot. Yeah, let's dismantle these structures that perpetuate privilege. But here's the problem. A lot of structures perpetuate privilege, and those structures are not unjust. In fact, they are good. Marriage, guys, marriage perpetuates privilege. Do we want to dismantle marriage? Right? What else? Having a country with vaguely Christian moral norms privileges Christians, right? The fact that we don't get to, make animal sacrifices, right? Or kill virgins on the altar, right? That privileges our Judeo-Christian worldview, right? It does. Is it good or bad? It's good. I'm glad we don't have human sacrifice anymore. We should not dismantle that norm, even though it perpetuates Christian, Judeo-Christian, Muslim privilege. Not all systems that perpetuate privilege are unjust. The question is the system unjust? Yes. We should dismantle unjust systems. We should get rid of unjust laws, but not all laws that perpetuate privilege. Big distinction there. Okay. But again, I think the point is people hear these slogans, they sound so good. They're using this slogan to dismantle actually unjust laws. Good for them. But the slogan itself is deeply flawed. Okay. So I've shown you how there's some positive elements buried in these slogans, but logically, if you follow them, and people do follow them to their bitter conclusion, they lead you to very false and dangerous places. So you might hear all this and say, okay, I get it. I see this in culture. I see this in the media. I see it in my classmates, in my classes. But this sounds like, is it really in the church, maybe in the mainline denominations, maybe the mainline denominations, they've kind of embraced these ideas. But are you saying that conservative evangelicals are saying these things? I don't really buy it. I think that you're using critical theory as a scare tactic, to oppose people that are concerned about justice. I get that a lot. People are saying, well, you're just using this as a way to bully us and to try to manipulate us into not caring about social justice from a biblical perspective. I get that a lot, but I'm going to argue that no. Critical theory is very much present within the evangelical church among professing evangelicals. I'm going to show you some pictures. I'm not naming any names. 0 names are involved in these slides, okay? I list their social media footprint, I list where they've written articles for, but these are prominent figures. And now that we've talked about critical theory, you'll see where it shows up in their statements. So look at one. Here's an article by an author who's a professor at Divinity School. She has 20,000 Twitter followers, very well known. She's written for Christianity Today, pretty major magazine. And she talks about how the world's divided into privileged people and oppressed people, right? And if you're part of a privileged group, you have lost your right to prophetic megaphone because you can't be a prophet and an oppressor at the same time. Think about that. Remember, she thinks that men are a privileged, she says that men are a privileged group. So you cannot be a prophet and an oppressor if you're part of an oppressor group, but men are all oppressors. So can men not speak prophetically anymore because they're part of an oppressor group? But this, clearly that's false, number one. But number two, that's critical theory that she's using to make these claims. Here's a major Christian racial reconciliation group. It has a list of rules for white people, not for black people or Hispanic people or for half Indian people like me, but for white people only who are involved in racial reconciliation. Here are their rules for white people. They include provide space for people of color to wail, cuss, or even yell at you. This is a Christian racial reconciliation group. Should Christians be cussing at each other and not because the person is being nasty, but because you're a white person, so I can cuss and yell at you. I'm a person of color. That's not how God's law works, people, right? You don't get to cuss at people, other Christians, because you're one color and they're another color. That's not okay. No Christian should be cussing and yelling at another Christian. Right? We all agree on that. Is that cool? No one should be yelling and screaming, right? But why is there an asymmetry there? Critical theory. Okay. Here's another one. This is from an author who has written for the ERLC website. It's a Southern Baptist Convention's Ethics and Religious Liberty website, very conservative website. This author's written for USA Today. She has 5,000 Twitter followers. She talks about systems of oppression and supremacy. So what are some systems of oppression and supremacy? She lists them. Male privilege, abled privilege, cis hetero privilege, citizenship status privilege, and so on. On this webpage of hers, she's recommending children's books for children ages 5 through 8 about how to raise woke children, okay? Now that's actually the title of her page until she realized it was cultural appropriation, in which case they changed the title to something else. But originally it was woke parenting. Guys, that's not a joke, I'm dead serious. Anyway, what are the books she lists on her website for kids ages 5 through 8? They're board books, alphabet books, okay? In this list of books, she includes books about the civil rights movement, slavery, women's suffrage, and also books like A is for Activist, which includes this line, LGBTQ, love who you choose because love is true, right? Or T is for True, tulip, tassels, tigers, tractors and tiaras, trust in the true, the he, she, they that is you. Now, why would civil rights movement and the LGBTQ act and Pride, the story of Harvey Milk and the Rainbow Flag, that's another book that she recommends. Why would those books all be on the same recommended list? Well, she says why. Because racism, sexism, cis hetero privilege, citizenship status privilege, these are all forms of oppression. That's critical theory. Here's one. This is an author who went to an evangelical seminary, conservative seminary. He's written for conservative evangelical websites, I won't name. He tweets, the Bible is written from the lens of the marginalized. If you come from a group or community that is not historically marginalized, you need these voices and perspectives in your life, or else your understanding of the Word, the gospel, and the Christian life will be thin and weak. Think carefully about what he's saying. Was Martin Luther's grasp of the Word, the gospel, and the Christian life thin and weak because he's a white European male? What about Calvin, Zwingli's, Spurgeon's, David Martin Lloyd-Jones? Were all these people, they have a weak grasp of the gospel and the Word because they were not in dialogue with minority, underprivileged groups? Now, why would he think that? Well, remember, oppressed people have special access to truths that are unavailable to oppressors. So on the view of critical theory, that's exactly right. Is it true biblically? If you go to someone and say, here's the Bible, read it and learn from it, well, they can't really grasp it unless they have the input of oppressed groups. Says who? I thought John says you do not need anyone to teach you because God's Spirit abides in you and he will teach you. Jesus sent the counselor to instruct us into all truth. Right? That's not what he's saying. He's promoting the view of critical theory. Here's a great one. This is a tweet. This guy has almost 100,000 Twitter followers, popular evangelical pastor. As white men move from an entitled majority and our country is increasingly led by women and people of color, a future without nuclear weapons feels within reach. A world where the weapons of colonialism and subjugation are confined to museums seems plausible. Help us, Lord. Guys, I'm half Indian here. I can say this. I'm half Indian. I got some sad news for you guys. Brown people have nuclear weapons. Brown people have nuclear weapons. I'm sorry, guys. My ancestors were smart enough to develop nuclear weapons. And on occasion, non-whites have actually engaged in colonialism and built empires and murdered millions of people once in a while, right? Genghis Khan, a little bit. But look at that. That is moral asymmetry. Question: who is more sinful, men or women? Who is more depraved, whites or non-whites? Right? Who has sin deep in their hearts? What group? Everyone. Thank you. We do not hope in a future because once women of color get the power, then they're going to be these perfect saints. No, people, we're fallen and dead in sin and trespasses, right? This sounds kind of like, oh, come on, but white men have been in power for so long, it's time for... But look, this just smacks of this idea that if only we get rid of these terrible white men, things would be just rosy. That is a deeply unbiblical anthropology. Women are wicked. Why? Because men are wicked. Humans are wicked. We don't think about human beings this way. Okay, finally, here's one. This is a long quote. I won't read it all. I'll try to quote from it a little bit. Tim Keller is a popular evangelical pastor in New York City. He wrote an article in the New York Times saying basically that no one political party perfectly captures the Christian values and ethics, okay? That's all he said. No one party is perfectly a Christian party, right? I totally agree with that. It's uncontroversial, okay. Here's the response of a very popular evangelical Christian author with 16,000 Twitter followers. She writes, Tim Keller, and it's a long post, right? But I'll just quote from it a little bit. Tim Keller has capital letters, no authority to teach on justice, none. He is a rich white man. The only ones with a divine authority to define the bounds of oppression are the oppressed themselves. Oppressed and colonized people wrote every single word of the Bible. What else? He has no authority. Keller has no authority to speak or teach on justice. Question, guys. What gives someone the authority to preach and teach on justice? Who said that? Who said that? Good answer. The Bible. The Bible, guys. If you are called by God to preach God's word, you have the authority to preach the full counsel of God, including God's commands on justice. Being an old white man does not mean you have no authority to teach on justice. This is like basic biblical doctrine, right? I mean, but this is incredible. Why would he have no authority? He is part of an oppressor group. He does not have the insight. Who defines the bounds of oppression? Oppressed people themselves. Why? They have greater insight into truth. This is critical theory. Okay, that's just, by the way, unfortunately, that is the tip of the iceberg in terms of the incursions that critical theory has made into not the mainline churches, not the secular world, but into conservative evangelical churches. Okay. Oh, so what do we do? Advice for dialogue. What do we do? How can we stem the tide of critical theory within the... I'm not worried about the culture. The culture is going to do what the culture is going to do. What can we do as Christians to say this is not biblical? Okay? I'm going to give you some very unintuitive, maybe, advice. Number one, acknowledge and fight racism. Guys, the reason that critical theory, just right now, is so popular, I'm not going to say about the culture, or in the church, because Christians are rightly ashamed, white Christians are rightly ashamed of the behavior of white Christians in the past. In chattel slavery, in Jim Crow, in just straight up racism, okay? And because of that, white Christians feel this sense of shame and will often sign on to these deeply unbiblical ideas because they're just like, well, man, our history is so messed up. If you want to show people that critical theory is not the answer, you need to then give them a biblical answer. How do you, and you have to say, I do want to fight racism, this is just not the way. So you're about to get a crash course in racism today. Not racism 50 years ago, not racism 200 years ago, but today, okay? I'm going to appeal not to theory, not to humanity. I'm going to appeal to experimental evidence because I'm a scientist. Here's some studies showing how racism and racial discrimination still affects our society today in 2019. Here's a graph. These are all studies that were carefully controlled for other variables. They didn't just do random things. There's careful studies that are done. These are hiring studies. They took applicants to send out resumes or do interviews, and they compared the response rate to black applicants versus white applicants. What they found was that whites were hired or received interviews at about, I think it was about twice the rate of whites received the interviews at twice the rate of blacks, all things being equal. But not only that, whites with no criminal record, these are all fake resumes, but whites with no criminal record received 20% more interviews than blacks. Whites with a criminal record. Whites with a criminal record received 20% more interviews than blacks with no criminal record. Right? So this is bias in hiring, and it's to the extent that even whites that have a criminal record are favored over blacks with a clean record. Here's another one. If you submit resumes, they're identical, but you give one resume a white-sounding name, like Emily or Greg, and the other resume, the same resume, with a black-sounding name, like Lakeisha or Jamal, the white resumes get 50% higher response rate, right? These are identical resumes with different names, not even pictures, not even races, just the names. Here's a meta-analysis of about 24 studies conducted over about 30 years. These were all carefully designed studies of hiring discrimination in the different job markets, different parts of the country. Consistently, whites got 40% more callbacks, interviews, job offers than blacks did, and it hasn't changed in 30 years. That 40% advantage they have hasn't changed in 30 years. This is Deva Pager, sociologist. Other examples. I think you say, well, okay, that's okay. Question, guys. Is our society colorblind? Is race meaningless anymore? No. Race matters, guys. This is unjust. It is unfair. How would you feel if you were black and couldn't get a job, and you're like, well, how much of that is due to my own? Maybe I'm a terrible student. I don't know. But how much is it due to this? I can't get my foot in the door because I'm being unfairly stereotyped because of my skin color. That is not right. What about individual, personal racism or discrimination? This is a graph showing approval of intermarriage. Or actually, I think this graph, this is approval. Approval of interracial marriage has gone up consistently for the last 50, 60 years, but as of 2013, I think, 16% of whites and about 4% of blacks did not approve of interracial marriage. Now, this is mind-boggling to me. I've been a Christian now for like, I don't know, 15, 20 years almost. I've been part of evangelical churches everywhere. And I have not once met an evangelical who is not like deeply loving, compassionate, and kind. I don't know who these people are, but look, if I have to judge between my lived experience and the data, what do I go with? The data, right? The data says, consistently, by the way, here's one poll, here's another poll. This is 28% of Republicans say that interracial marriage is not just in some vague sense, oh, it's unadvisable, it's unwise. They think it's immoral, morally wrong. 28% of Republicans think interracial marriage is morally wrong. You say, well, I don't think that. Yeah, fine, you don't think that, and no one I know thinks that. Great, good. But this is reality. This is the data. This is consistent polling data. Okay? You say, well, these are all non-Christians. Really? His is from Bradley Wright, he's a Christian sociologist. His book, Christians Are Hate-Filled Hypocrites and Other Lies You've Been Told. In that book, he has the same graph for church-going Christians who are identified as evangelicals. 34% of them would oppose a close relative marrying a black person. Now again, how many racist Christians have I met personally in 20 years of being Christian? Zero. I'm not zero. But again, my lived experience is not reality. The data shows you reality. Can the data say that there is a lot of actual racial animus in the U.S. today? If we don't keep, you don't have to be a liberal to think racism is a sin. You only have to be a Christian to think that. And you don't have to be a liberal to preach that racism is a sin. You should be a good Christian, faithful pastor to preach that from our pulpits regularly. Okay, and there's more I could go into, but I'll stop there. I just want to point out that if you are concerned, as I am, about the encroachment of critical theory into the evangelical church, you should have the loudest voice in denouncing genuine racism. You should be yearning to see actual multi-ethnic movements of believers who embrace one another. Look, our society is divided along lines of race, politics, economics. The church should be a place where we come together as brothers and sisters in Christ because we have a common Savior, right? The world should look at the church and say, that is different. How do they get along like that? The answer is because Jesus redeemed us and we are brothers and sisters here, right? 2, read broadly. I do not actually have, wrong button. I own a TV. I do not watch TV. I watch Netflix occasionally. Okay, but I don't get my information from the news. Why? It's garbage, guys. It's so sensationalistic. Okay. If you want to learn about a topic, like anything, any topic, but especially one like controversial like race or gender or sex, anything, okay? Don't watch TV. I don't care whether you watch Fox News or MSNBC. Don't watch anything. Read books. Read books by diverse authors with different opinions, like these guys. Now, wait a minute. You said diverse authors. Those are all black men. Guess what, guys? Black men don't all think the same thing, right? Oh, I never knew. Really? Yes, they're people. Look, human beings are individuals. That's critical theory, guys. People are not these avatars of their respective groups, right? We are individuals with different ideas. These guys, I don't know if you know who these guys are, but they have very different ideas about race, okay? But read their books. Read Kendi's Stamp from the Beginning about the history of racism and slavery in the U.S. There's lots in it that's wrong. That's fine. Use discernment, okay? Read John McWhorter. Use Ta-Nehisi Coates. Read Greg Laurie. Read Cornel West. Read Thomas Sowell, okay? Read these people, but look, exercise discernment. I picked these authors because 3 of them are liberal and 3 are conservative. I think. I got it right. Yeah, that's right. But the point is, when you read from different viewpoints, different intellectual viewpoints, they disagree, it'll force you to actually figure out who's right. If you read only one side of the issue, you have no idea who's telling the truth because they all agree with you. Okay? You have to read broadly. I am, believe it or not, politically conservative. I don't make a big deal about that, but I am. I have not read a single book by a conservative in ever, and for the last 2 years, I've read nothing but atheist critical theorists, okay? Right? Why? Is it because I'm not, no, it's because I do not want people telling me what I already believe. I want to hear the best arguments from the other side. I read atheists, I read Dawkins, I read Hitchens, I read Sean Carroll. I read atheists, I read critical theorists. I want to hear their beliefs. It's not going to change my beliefs necessarily, but the point is I will understand them better. If you lean liberal, if you lean conservative, pick the other side and get the best voices. Don't go pick the Yahoo out on the other side and say, he's an idiot. Right? Pick the very best representatives of the other perspective, okay? And read them. Don't blog about them and don't listen to their podcasts. Read them, okay? One plug, George Yancey. He's a Christian evangelical sociologist. His book, Beyond Racial Gridlock, is one I always recommend. I don't agree with everything in it. That's fine. That's okay, right? We're friends still. But it is light years beyond anything you'll read about racial reconciliation, especially in the culture today, okay? It's really gospel-grounded, rooted in biblical theology. Highly recommend George Yancey's Beyond Racial Gridlock. And finally, I'll close with this. We have to put the gospel first. This is a huge, it's going to be secondary or concomitant issue with critical theory. A lot of Christians today care about social justice. Very slippery word, hard to define. But there's only one question we should ask when it comes to social. The first question we should ask. The first question is this: is social justice an imperative? Does God command it? Is it your obligation? Right? Is it something you ought to do? Yes or no? Okay. Now let's assume, for the sake of argument, assume the answer is yes. You are commanded by God to do social justice. Okay, let's assume that answer is yes. Okay. Second question: is the gospel an imperative command or an indicative statement? Is the gospel, does it say do this and live, or does it say Jesus has done this so that you may live? What's the answer? The gospel is an indicative statement. If you think social justice is an imperative, it's imperative. You ought to. God commands you to do social justice. Well, that's the law. It's not the gospel. The gospel is Christ did this on your behalf. You must never mingle the law with the gospel. The law says do, the gospel says done. You dare not mingle the two. Why? There's only one person in history who's actually kept God's law, and that's Jesus. It's not you. If you think that do this and live is the gospel, you can include commands like do this and live into the gospel, you're wrong. You have undercut the core of the Christian message, which is that only one man lived a life of justice, and he died on the cross for you, so that you, in your injustice and wickedness, could be reconciled to God. That is the Christian declaration. And if you muddy that, if you obscure that by saying, oh, but we want to do social justice too, you are muddying the essential element that the church has stood on for 2,000 years, which is that we are sinners in need of a rescuer. So I just want to close by saying that is crucial to understanding the social justice debate. We must keep the law and the gospel separate. By all means, pursue biblical justice, but never confuse that with God's rescue of us in Christ. So I am done. I think we have time for Q&A. A little time for Q&A. As Christians, the question was, as Christians, it's our duty to fight racism. What do I mean by that? Well, that's actually interesting because the definition of racism is actually up for grabs these days. The traditional definition in the dictionary is that racism is sort of animus based on race, so hatred of someone based on their race, which is clearly a sin based on the command that you should love your neighbor, not hate them. So hating them for any reason is a sin. The other definition that's out there, it's common, is that racism is a power relationship, so that only people of color can be racist by definition. Now, I would actually reject that definition because, again, it assumes this moral asymmetry, whereas I would say racism is a sin and all people can sin, therefore racism should be symmetric. But so when I talk about opposing racism, I mean opposing hatred based on race. Now, we should also be careful because there can be, as critical theorists have correctly pointed out, there can be no actual hatred at all for someone, and you can still have these systems that perpetuate disparities. For example, just take an example. Clearly, after the Civil War, when all the slaves were freed, were they now rich? No, they were desperately poor, and they were taken advantage of by the former slave owners. You could say, now even hypothetically, even if the slave owners hypothetically had not hated the slaves at all, which is not true, but let's say that hypothetically that was the case, it would not be correct to say, well, look, there's no more racial hatred, so good, let's go, I'll be able to go home. No, there's this huge disparity in wealth because you've enslaved them for 200 years. So I would also say that because we should be mindful of the fact that even non-racist people, in the traditional sense, can still live under laws that perpetuate these injustices of the past, we should work to say, how can we improve the conditions for people that have been affected by racism of the past? That's a legitimate question. It's a complicated answer, though. So I think Christians can actually disagree on how we can best achieve the healing of communities that have been influenced by historical racism. Other question right there? So the question was, would I consider affirmative action to be moral asymmetry? I would say, and this is, I'll dodge the question. I'll be upfront about dodging the question. I personally, okay, I won't dodge entirely. I personally am uncomfortable with affirmative action. However, I will say that I think there are decent arguments that can be made, very many different arguments that can be made in favor of affirmative action. In other words, I don't think it's an open and shut case. Like, well, obviously this is racist, because, and here's just an example. One of the arguments that would be appealed to in the pro-affirmative action camp would be, in the same way that slaves, when they were freed, are still experiencing the unjust effects of slavery. Now it's like, well, now you have to restore them to where they would have been if they hadn't been slaves, right? That's just, right? So they would say, well, it's the same position we're in right now, is that after literally 300 years of slavery and Jim Crow laws and legal discrimination, where they were kept out of these schools, now then we have to counteract all that racism of the past. We now have to counteract it by instituting things like affirmative action. That's the argument. That's one of the arguments, but there are actually many different arguments in favor of affirmative action. Personally, again, I'm comfortable with that. I think it's at least plausible to say that as a Christian. It's like not saying white people are evil. That said, I know Letitia's going to bring up the Harvard case in the Supreme Court, where Asians actually are being discriminated against due to affirmative action because there are too many Asians at Harvard. I kid you not. So the Supreme Court currently is actually trying to figure out, gosh, is it really cool to keep Asians out based on affirmative action? That doesn't seem right either. So it is complicated. He's going to grill me on the panel, I'm sure. Yeah, next. Reparations, I think the similar argument could be advanced for reparations. What I would say, and so my take on, oh gosh, you guys are really going to make me say controversial things. Having studied the arguments, okay, what I will tentatively say is this. I don't think we should, whatever we do, I'll say this firmly, whatever we do should not be called reparations, okay? Even if it involves a wealth transfer from whites to blacks, right? Even if we did that, just blatantly, that's our policy. And here's why. I think from a Christian view of justice, right, justice has to be primarily located between individuals, right? I can go into the biblical justification for that, okay? So the primary source of justice is between individuals, okay? But you can't then say we're going to have this justice between these huge groups of people, even if individually there's injustice, right? The example I always use is this. Imagine we're all in a bank. We all bank at some bank, and the bank manager is a sexist, and the bank manager takes half of the women at the bank at random and gives half their money to half the men in the bank at random. He does that one day. The next day we wake up, all this money's been transferred, okay? But no one knows whose money was stolen, and no one knows who got the money, right? Question, is it just to just say, well, fine, let's take all the money that was stolen and just transfer it to the women now, so that's back to even? Well, if that happened, half the women would be getting money that had no money taken, and half the men would be getting money taken from them that hadn't gotten any money in return. So there's lots of injustice going on there at an individual level. Is that justice for the groups? I think as a Christian, it's very hard for me to say if that's clearly just, because the groups involved are all kind of coming out even Steven. I don't know. So what I would say is my personal feeling, and I think is actually, I think a common ground that we can all agree on, there are undeniably racial disparities that are the direct consequence of slavery and Jim Crow, and especially the concentration of urban poverty. So they are the direct effects of actual racism, okay? As Christians, we need to say, how can we heal those effects, okay, in a just manner? So what I would say, and I'm not a politician, I haven't studied policy, I would say, can we agree that we want to help inner city communities, which are predominantly minority, and pour resources into them? And again, conservatives and liberals will disagree how it's best accomplished, but can we do that with the effect will be that blacks are lifted up, right? Which is what I hope we all want that, right? But we're not going to say, oh, because your skin is this color, we're going to do this to you. So the idea would be, actually, Ta-Nehisi Coates, who's very much in favor of reparations, wrote a famous article for The Atlantic on reparations about 2 years ago. He actually says that might be the best way to go, to have basically be like class-based reparations. In other words, we're going to focus on uplifting the poor, who are predominantly African American, and as a result, that will lead to what amounts to our without calling it reparations. We're targeting the poor, but that will be disproportionately blacks. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but how are you not taking from the rich?
Well, okay, that's the question. Then the question, the conservatives will say, well, wait a minute, all welfare is suspect because it's welfare distribution. This is where I'd say, well, this is where Christians, I think, have to get into the policy issues, right? But all I'm arguing is that people always want to say, like, I know what you're trying to do. You're trying to make me vote Republican. You're a Trump supporter. I'm like, I do not care about President Trump. He's not in my head. Shouldn't be in yours either. I want to talk about theology and worldviews, okay? So all I'm asking is that you could have a Christian who's adamantly for welfare, a Christian who's adamantly against welfare, but we have to agree on the biblical principles first, right? What I'm showing you is critical theory is anti-biblical principles. So once we're all agreed that this is completely false, then let's meet together and talk about what's the best way to affect, like, to help the poor. Thomas Sowell and, what's his name? What's the New York Times writer guy? The K, not Kahneman. Anyway, Bill Christoph. They'll disagree. Their economists will disagree radically on what's the best way we can help the poor. But I'm saying let's start not with politics or policy. Let's start with biblical theology and throw this out because this is bad stuff. Have white males always been on top? Men have always been on top, they will say. Feminists would say. White males, no, but they would say that Ibram Kendi says that whiteness is a global project. He actually says that racial disparities all over the world are due to white supremacy, everywhere, discrimination. So they would say that not in history, men have always been on top, not whites per se, but today they are on top, and is there an inversion? No, why? Hegemonic power. So, for example, Barack Obama, first black president, right? People are like, oh, see, we're post-racial. No, because the whites still have hegemonic power. It's not about whether you're president, it's just a figurehead. But the ideology we've embraced is still that of the white male. So the answer is so the weird thing is that no matter how many people, no matter how many women and minorities get this high position of power, they can always still argue that the hegemonic power is invested in whiteness or in men or in heterosexuals. That in some ways is almost unfalsifiable because always say, this is the radical feminist it is completely unfalsifiable. The patriarchy is behind everything. They're like everywhere. They're behind every corner. They're like under the desk. The patriarchy is making you do that. So anything you see that you don't like can be blamed on the patriarchy. I mean, that's a caricature, but I think it is true that they will see it as just insidious and infusing everything and really hard to get rid of. Well, secular people who are invested in critical theory will just go right to the conclusion. In other words, secular people immediately will be like, yeah, of course, racism, sexism, classism, heteronormativity, all those things, homophobia, transphobia, Islamophobia, of course they're all equal and evil, right? So secular people will completely embrace all that from the outset. What I'm pointing out is that Christians will get hooked into it by saying, well, of course we should dismantle oppression. Of course. And then they're like, well, what does that mean? Well, it means that, okay, but sexism is oppressive. Okay, I'll dismantle that. Okay, well then heterosexism is oppressive. Okay, well transphobia is oppressive. So they are the ones who start out at a place that sort of is defensible biblically, but then gradually drift rapidly towards these more extreme versions. I have to go on because there are other people. Yep. Yeah, so the question was, should Christians focus on the individual and talking to individuals, or we should talk about shaping culture? That, again, I should have punted these other questions too. I hate getting, this is a good question, Mike, great question. But people, when I give these talks, always want to get me to talk about Trump or about affirmative action or culture making. Good question. But so I would personally say both. I would say we should focus on individual salvation. We should also try to create a culture of a Christian. You can't create Christian cultures because people are Christian, not cultures. But you can create a culture and laws that reflect Christian doctrine. For example, people that are pro-life want to create pro-life laws. Is that hypocritical? No. They're trying to create a culture of life. That's a good thing. That said, so I think the answer is both and. We should be focused on individuals because individuals can be saved, but not cultures. C.S. Lewis said, individual people are eternal. Cultures are like gnats. They're going to die. A billion years from now, there will be no America, but there will be human beings. So you can do both. But I would say that in general, and for any future question askers, really resist the urge to say, what should I believe about X topic? Affirmative action, reparations, this or that. If you are 100% on board with me on this stuff, I'm content. That's good. All I came here to do. I truly believe, and I get in trouble for this. I truly believe even questions like reparations are the kind of things that Christians can disagree about and can meet together and discuss as brothers and sisters in Christ. And I'm not saying they're both all right. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that those are in-house discussions. This is not an in-house discussion, right? This is an outside of the house, outside of the planet, into the solar system discussion. This is not Christianity, right? So I just want us to be on the same page there. And then we'll, talk about culture and other issues, but please, this is the main point. I think I saw Taylor, yeah. So in terms of critical theory, all those groups would be oppressed groups. And interestingly, this is the part of the problem with critical theory is that I'd address critical theory from a Christian perspective. So an external perspective said this is not compatible with the Bible. But internally, critical theory has a lot of contradictions too. So one of them, as you pointed out, there is actually some infighting between various oppressed groups because they will say they want to create coalitions based on oppression. They try to, but actually the critical theorists themselves will point out, but what if, this is actually the idea of intersectionality came from, the idea that white women and black women will not have the same goals. So if you notice, I actually had a picture I took out of the talk, but at the Women's March against Trump, 2017, they had a Women's March to oppose President Trump. They all wore the pink hats, but one of the women held a sign at the march that said, she's a black woman, she held a sign that said, "Don't forget, white women voted for Trump." This is at an anti-Trump march, right? What's she saying? She's saying intersectionality. She's saying, I'm here with other women because we oppose Trump, but don't you forget, the white women here have some answering to do because their people voted for Trump. So the point I'm making there is just that, for example, in the oppressed community, there's a tension between, say, the blacks who are oppressed and Native Americans who are oppressed and immigrant children who are oppressed, undocumented workers who are oppressed. And they realize that this coalition is held together by our oppressed status, but actually there's infighting because what's good for blacks may not be good for immigrants and vice versa. So there is actual tension. And I would say actually that's why Christianity has the answer. What you need is not to be unified against an enemy, but to be unified in Christ. What you need is to say, actually, we're not here to fight the man. We're here to embrace Jesus, and that will bring us together rather than sort of finding a common foe. As for how does Christians address the issue, again, I think that's a policy issue in terms of but the funny thing is, because Christians should not see them as these monoliths, oh, you're oppressed. Like, no, that's Dave, that's George, that's Neil. We're not looking at people as these monolithic groups. We're saying you're an individual with needs, how can I meet them? And sure, communities will have needs, but I think at a fundamental level, we don't see people as groups. We see them as people made in God's image. Is there a question about that? Oh, sorry, that. Okay, big question. So, question was, what is the difference between critical theory and Marxism? I did not talk about history at all. Critical theory originated with the Frankfurt School, who were a bunch of explicitly Marxist philosophers living in Germany. They came to Columbia. It spun off from there. Antonio Gramsci is another neo-Marxist anarchist from Italy who was influential in critical theory, and it's evolved a lot. Today, you will often hear the phrase cultural Marxism, right, used to describe this whole thing I'm talking about, okay? I didn't use the M word even one time for a reason.
That's important.
It's important. There is, so for everything, Google cultural Marxism, and half the articles you find will be like, yeah, cultural Marxism is a thing, and they'll talk about critical theory, right? The other half of the articles from like Slate or Huffington Post will say like, there's this evil like Rush Limbaugh, Sean Hannity, Fox News conspiracy theory called cultural Marxism, which is like this crazy like UFOs are taking over our lizard people and they're destroying our democracy and apple pie. So if you use the phrase cultural Marxism, your progressive friends will be like, oh, I know what you are. You listen to Fox News. So I don't even use the M word. I talk about critical theory because in academia, critical theory is more popular of a phrase by far than cultural Marxism. Now, actually, cultural Marxism is technically a true academic phrase. It's used by scholars like Dworkin. So it's not a conspiracy theory. It's a real thing. But just use this word. Use critical theory because no one's like, oh, critical theory, you listen to Sean Hannity. They're like, oh, critical theory, what's that? So it just will diffuse, bring down the temperature of the room. So just talk about critical theory. The reality is that, yes, there are huge similarities between Marx's view of oppressor-oppressed relationships and class relations and these views, how it applies to culture. There are also differences. Marx was a materialist. Critical theorists are not. They're constructionists, generally speaking. Don't worry about that. The bottom line is that, yeah, we can talk later. But don't use the M word, please. I beg you. Just say critical theory, please. I saw, Jeremy, you don't get the count. You're the organizer. You first. To what extent is lived experience reliable? Lived experience is 100% reliable to tell you all about your lived experience. So if I have a lived experience, that is absolutely true of my lived experience. What I cannot do is extrapolate from my lived experience, which is 100% reliable, to objective claims about truth that are general, right? So I could say, I had Cheerios for breakfast today, okay? That's my lived experience. Like, amen to that, right? What you can't say is, everybody in the world throughout history has had Cheerios for breakfast because of my lived experience. Whoa! Okay, you've gone from a very narrow claim about your personal experience to some general claim, and we miss that shift completely, right? We totally ignore that. So another way to put it is, when you have a lived experience, you have to interpret that experience in order to draw any conclusion from it. So for example, if I have a lived experience that, I don't know, I have a lived experience that, oh yeah, my lived experience is that this other woman is very attractive, right? Okay, that's my lived experience, right? But Neil, you're married, right? Therefore, I cannot say, well, my lived experience tells me that my truth is that I should get a divorce, right? Because that's my lived experience. No. I illicitly interpreted my lived experience, which is true. I'm attracted to this woman. I'm not, by the way. If you're listening, honey, Christina, this is hypothetical. But if I have lived experience, I have to interpret it to get to anything that's relevant, like divorce is fine, extramarital sex is fine. So that's the illicit extrapolation. So you have to, but just listen for that, because the way it's often used is, I was born lesbian or gay. I know it's my lived experience, and therefore what? Well, therefore you know your feelings, you know what you but you don't know that that's God's will for your life. You don't know whether that's true or normative for other people. So I think that's, we have to be very careful not to say, draw a line from there to there. And it's so silly when it looks like adultery. You're like, you can't say, Neil, you're attracted to this woman, your lived experience tells you that adultery is fine. That's obviously a fallacy. Yet for other issues, we totally miss that distinction. That's an important one to make.
George Orwell's 1984.
I totally agree. So there are times when you have to say, look, this is what a human being is. Period. You're not going to change the definition. This is what racism means, and this is the definition in the dictionary. I'm going to use this definition. But other times there are multiple terms we can use. So it's purely pragmatic here. I'm not saying, so if there were no other term you could use and not cause hackles to go up, then I'd say, yeah, use whatever you want. But I'm telling you, man, thousands of interactions online. If you say cultural Marxism, you're like, oh, you hate justice. You're an oppressor. If you say critical theory, they're like, oh, what's that? And you can actually then pour meaning into this is the actual preferred phrase in academia. So yeah, don't seed terms if they're the only ones you can use. But I'm saying there are tons of synonyms actually, and I say critical theory is probably even a better, more accurate term than cultural Marxism. So in this case, you're using the better preferred term, and also one that is not going to raise a lot of barriers. That's my answer. But yeah, don't do that for other terms. If you're not going to change the definition of love or hate or tolerance because so-and-so wants you to. Yep. No, I mean, we're all too rich to go to civil war, frankly. I think we're just too comfortable, right? No one wants to sacrifice all the good stuff they have. But I mean, maybe I'm naive. I don't know. But again, like I keep saying, I know you really have these application questions, but I really want everyone to be on the same page theologically, right? I do not want people to walk out of here and say, well, I am, politically so liberal that all this is irrelevant to me. I'm like, are you a Christian? I don't care if you are, a Bernie Sanders fanboy. I want you agreeing with this stuff because this is biblical theology, basic biblical theology that we should all agree on. So again, I appreciate the desire to apply this stuff to other stuff, to politics. But yeah, the center of this talk is it biblical? And the answer is no, and let's all really firmly agree. I have people, again, what I found, just by conclusion, I think, when people understand critical theory, just understand it, and have words to use to describe what's going on, they are forearmed against it, right? So people are like, I actually had people email me and say, I heard your talk, I think I just left a cult. Because they were Christian and they had unknowingly imbibed this ideology. When they read my talk, they're like, oh my gosh, this is completely false. I felt something was wrong, but now I know what it was. This is wrong. Let's get rid of it. Jeremy, do you have a question, Theo? So Taylor's reference was to the idea that we can borrow things from non-Christian sources that are actually still true and useful for Christians. That's plundering the Egyptians. I had exactly this debate over my support for SBC Resolution number 9. If you guys followed that, I supported it, and I got lots of pushback. The bottom line is, the bottom line is this. We have to be very discerning when we borrow things from non-Christian worldviews. And what I would say when it comes to critical theory, it is so heretical, it is so deeply opposed to Christianity at the most basic level. Things like God's an oppressor. I'm sorry, guys, there's not a way to work that into Christianity. Okay. I would say this: if you are the kind of person who says, I'm going to take critical race theory, say, I'm going to use it as a tool and use it as a tool to treat modern racial injustice, but only as a tool, I will submit it to Scripture. That's, by the way, I support that view. I got flack for supporting that view. We can use critical race theory as an analytic tool divorced from this worldview, okay? I support that idea. Here's what I would say, though, just my big caveat. You should use things like critical race theory in the same way that you would use, or intersectionality, in the same way you would use queer theory. Is there any insight that can be gained from queer theory? Yes, there actually is. All truth is God's truth. We can take any of these worldviews and these ideas and find elements of truth, because we're living in God's universe, that are actually true and can be affirmed by Christians. Is it good to go and give a seminar in your church on the benefits of queer theory? No, right? Because it is so dangerous to try to take out these nuggets of truth and get a chunk of poison along with it. So all I would say is, yes, you're very careful and very cautious. You can extract elements of truth from things like critical race theory, intersectionality. I defend that view, but be as cautious as you would be extracting elements from queer theory or from I don't know, any other radically non-Christian worldview. Last question. So Jeremy's question was, let's say we all embrace this view, and we all work to liberate the oppressed, all of us, even the oppressors. But is there any safeguard then that against us just picking a new dominant group and making them the oppressors to oppress everybody else? Are there safeguards within critical theory? And the answer is no, a big fat no. And so I gave it an external critique, saying as a Christian, this is why critical theory is wrong. One of the main internal critique that I would have, one of many, is that exactly that. In critical theory, first of all, there's no stopping point, because you can always say, I'm still oppressed. So women can say that even if they're like if there's a female president and all female CEOs and there's an entire female NFL team, right? They can still say, but men have hegemonic power, and it's in their unconsciousness, and with the fact that women still breastfeed is evidence of the patriarchy, right? That can, you guys, you think I'm joking, don't you? Okay, there is no way to ever reach an end goal and say we're now equal. There's no stopping point. And what is more, they can there is no way to say this group is being unjust. Why? Because their definitions of justice are, this is what I talked about, this the reparations thing, they're looking at group justice that extends backwards in time, forever, right? So you could do things like punish a man for being a man, not because you're like, look, you have a female president, an all-female cabinet, an all-female CEO roster, and all-female NFL players. You're still punishing the men. Why? Because throughout history, you punished us, so it's our turn now, right? There's no safeguard against that because you're viewing people as groups through history. And so, yeah, one of the big objections is, and here's okay, for you guys, this is the great irony. Critical theory thinks we should dismantle and destroy hegemonic power, right? When people have this power to impose their narratives, and they tell these stories about why their group deserves to be in charge, right? That's hegemonic power. Question. You're off to college in a year. Who has hegemonic power on college campuses right now? Critical theorists. Who's telling a story about why they deserve to have power and control over the institution, why they're righteous and everyone else is bad, whether everyone else is bigots and they're virtuous? Who's telling that story? Critical theorists. Guys, it's already happening. They have the hegemonic power, and they are using it to justify marginalizing other groups. The difference is, this time the groups are reversed. I'm saying as a Christian, guys, let's not oppress anybody. Radical thought. Let's love one another as brothers and sisters in Christ, right? So rather than, again, so that guys, I want to say this last thing, guys. Look around. We have blacks, whites, Asians, men, women in this auditorium, right? By the way, too, we have racists in this auditorium, guys. The data says we probably do, okay? That's a sin. Let's repent. Guys, let's repent. Do not run. I present this. People, all the conservatives are like, yeah, amen, brother. I'm like, look, that's a sin. Racism is a sin. Sexism is a sin. You don't have to choose between denouncing one or the other. Let's denounce both and find a better way, which is the Christian way.